Hello, everyone, or some people. If this is everyone, then we're going to have a quorum problem.
Hello.
I'm going to wait a couple more minutes for folks to trickle in. Looks like Mike Lieberman, Brant Keller, and Marina Moore are all known to be not here. So given that, we're missing John and Eddie, but we may be close to the strength we can get. And this is all being recorded for later. With that, maybe I will read the intro script. Hello, everyone. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and posted to LFX and YouTube. Your participation in these meetings is an agreement to abide by the Cloud Native Code of Conduct, and I need someone to volunteer as a scribe because I can't always do facilitate and type at the same time.
I can help, Evan.
Thank you. Oh, that's the wrong link. Dang it. Okay. New member intros. Anyone want to introduce themselves? If not, I know Matt has been working on a demo of the work that the Supply Chain Insights Initiative has been getting up to. So without further ado, Matt.
Hey, can you hear me okay? Okay. So before I share my screen, I'll say I'm not actually going to run a live demo because it takes a few minutes to run to do all the GraphQL queries, but I would like to give you an update on what I've been up to so far. So when we started, we said, hey, we want to take all the SBOMs from the CNCF projects that they produce and come up with a way to analyze them at scale, something that will scale. And the overall approach has been at 10,000 feet, like get the SBOMs, throw them into something like Guac, which can build a graph and enrich those SBOMs, or pull out to other sites and do what Guac does and build an enriched graph. And so we did some work that I'm not going to demo today, but was a little bit ahead. It was a bit of a solution ahead of some fundamentals, namely, where are the SBOMs? Like, surely we have 200 and something projects, and we have various ways to link to where they are, and release assets and CI jobs and all of these standard tools and emerging tools. So I think assumption number one for naive Matt, who I do like to play my naive for a bit because it can surface out requirements. But in this case, I was genuinely naive, thinking that, hey, we could just get a list of all of the SBOMs for all of the things that are built in short order. So after kind of working out some of the overall, like, can this work from an architectural perspective? Like, assuming we have SBOMs, how do we actually fan out and process them? One choice is to build a big giant Guac instance, and that's a choice. Another way is to have a whole bunch of small Guac instances that can run in the context of a CI job or some other sort of data pipeline that can enrich graphs for just a particular project's SBOM or SBOMs, and then persist that graph and then mix and match and make union sets of all of that data later. So a bunch of work in the first few weeks to a month back in the late summer went into that. And I think we have a good approach there that at least will work for the context of this initiative, and has some legs. Then the next problem is, okay, well, if we're going to report on this and if we're going to provide tools, how do we know what we're building? And so what's the state of the CNCF? Like, how findable are SBOMs and attestations and all kinds of other security metadata? And it turns out that's a hard question to answer, because information is sort of scattered in a whole bunch of different ways. So what I've done is I've built a tool that issues some GraphQL queries against a bunch of repos, and I'll show what repos I'm using and finding in a moment. I had some interesting things that I've discovered even in the last week around where we do bookkeeping for registering what are interesting repos across all of these orgs and projects, right? So we issue a whole bunch of GraphQL queries and then throw it into a DuckDB database, nice and lightweight. This data is quite small, at least small enough for DuckDB locally. Build out a relational model, and then we can, like, start using some better tools. And so right now, I pull a bunch of information from each repo. For example, is there a security.md file? Jen Power had the idea a week and a half ago or so. It's not a new idea, but hey, there's the Security Insights project. So the security-insights files, and they can live in a couple different places and be a couple different cases. And it turns out that has 2 actual versions. So here we already see some proliferation of what's useful info. Other useful info is, let me get all of the files that are in the GitHub .github/workflows directory. So if we have all of the workflows and all of the CI for at least GitHub Actions, which doesn't cover Kubernetes and a bunch of other large projects that don't use GitHub Actions, but does very quickly cover a giant bulk of the CNCF project ecosystem. They do use GitHub Actions. If we have all of that in something like DuckDB, wouldn't it be great? Because now we can, at scale, figure out what tools like Sift or Trivy or SBOM Generator or just all the different security related tools, we can go look for their invocation and their configuration in CI workflows. So we pull those files as well. And then we also pull release artifacts because some projects have started actually publishing some of these things, whether they're SIGs or SBOMs or whatever, as actual GitHub release artifact assets. So we've got a GraphQL query that's fairly cheap to run because it's not pulling a whole bunch of stuff. It's just pulling that stuff against a bunch of repos. And so I'm going to share my screen and show you what it would look like if you were to clone and run the tool because, again, it gets quick. Here we go. Right. So running that might look like this, right? So you would just run npm run landscape, right? The way the project is configured now, and it pulls the landscape.yaml that the CNCF keeps, which is this massive, all of the partners and members as well as projects. It slurps out the config for the 233 projects that we have. And then in that landscape YAML, and you're going to, anyone who's familiar with this, more familiar than I was when I started, will say this is woefully not enough, but bear with me. So at first pass, and this was a couple of days ago or last week, it runs and it runs this GraphQL query on all these repos. And it's just pulling the primary repo at this point from the CNCF's landscape file. Then it goes and it makes a DuckDB database, and then it goes through and looks for the results, and it goes, hey, I found security insights files. I found, it actually looked for security MD, and it teases out what the version is. And so it's building tables for all of this. It builds a bunch of base tables, then it builds a bunch of aggregation tables, just using some straight up SQL. It's not flashy. I'm new to TypeScript, so I was playing with a lot of this for the first time, as well as DuckDB. And then it goes and builds full text search indexes, on some of the things I mentioned. It says, hey, now we can go look for patterns. So what we look for today is this. I'll try to make it big. So this is in the docs, and it looks for patterns in release artifacts. But now that I've added full text search indexing and some other stuff, and I'm about to get smarter about workflows, we can use this at bigger scale. So we look for Vex documents and Toto stuff, SigStore stuff, other general tools that seem to be in use. And if you see CI means I'm looking for them in that repo's full GitHub Actions files. And so CI means that, and then artifact means a release artifact. And in some cases, we do regular expression searches because they're better. But in most cases, the full text search seems to be working better and a lot snappier. Again, this is meant to just be a lightweight local tool. And then I've kind of put details around like what we're actually looking for. And this was a bit of learning for me because I was familiar with obviously some of these tools, but absolutely not all of them. So that brings us to fairly more recently when it turns out that the CLO Monitor project, and if you're not familiar with it, it's this. It has its own config, which is of course not in the same shape or style as the other landscape file. But it does have, not just for the CNCF, but for a bunch of other stuff, it has some additional YAML files. And the CNCF YAML file here has a whole bunch, not all of the CNCF projects, and it has a much more detailed look at what other repositories are relevant in terms of advertising themselves to CLO Monitor. And many of those have security.mds and security insights files, which can contain actual links to, in the V2 version of the security insights file, actual JSON, actual SBOMs, right? So there's a field in there. So I just yesterday and the day before and this morning was messing around with this. And when I run that, it's like, okay, so we find our initial 233 CNCF projects, but then this brings in an extra 444 repos. Right, so now all of these repos are now pulled in from CLO monitor information. This is interesting to me because also one of the goals for this was, hey, if we have something that works for the CNCF, it might work for other foundations too. And CLO monitor, it turns out, is monitoring not just CNCF, but it has config for a bunch of other stuff. So there's an existing, compatibility of tools here. So it leaves the door open to that. But for just the CNCF, so now I've got like this much longer list of all this stuff. And I go fetch from this much longer list of all this stuff. And so now like this horizontally scalable mechanism that we've made of like what tools are being used so that we can then go ferret out where are the actual SBOMs landing in a way that's not like have every single project, or just, I'm trying to avoid something that is a human in the loop, at least initially, to build up a list of like what tools are being used, how are SBOMs being generated, where are they landing. A lot of that stuff is buried in the CI config, right? But first, I didn't want to show stats when the data set was incomplete. And so the current state is I pulled all that and then boom, this morning I was debugging some SQL junk. So so what's actually checked into a working branch here and people can use doesn't include the augmentation of CLO monitor information, but it does have the actual data, right? So I think I'm short on time here. I've just burned 15 minutes, but I don't yet have full info from all of the advertised repos. The next step out, by the way, obviously, is we can just do a GraphQL query that says, hey, for each CNCF project, what organization are they part of? What are all the repos in that organization? And then just expand it out to that. And by my math, that's like a couple thousand repos. But I haven't gone there yet because I'm sticking within what is likely to be the most relevant ones. Evan has a hand up. I'll finish up and say what I could use help with is figuring out how Kubernetes, I know the BOM tool is used, but like some of where would I go to find out generically for all of the Kubernetes and SIGs, how could I not reinvent the wheel and go on another voyage of discovery? But I hope in the near term to have for the CLO monitor augmented set, which is like 600 or so repos that are advertised as to CLO monitor, at least in the CNCF, like breakdowns of what tools are being used and what SBOMs did we actually find. And right now it's like something like 10% is what I found so far of projects have security .md or security insights files at best, and most of them are V1, not V2. So I still have some analysis and parsing to do, but the general state of the project is that it's, hey, here's the thing with DuckDB. As soon as I get to like being done with this and being able to report on that, to call that milestone one of this, that gives us an input set of SBOMs, but more importantly, I think an understanding of what tools are being used so that we can prioritize, any kind of automated finding of these. Or advertising a way where projects can go update, say, CLO monitor information, more completely. Because what I've been finding already, lastly, is, if I dump all of those CI files from all of those repos and just grep through them, there are far more project repositories that are actually building SBOMs clearly that are not advertising them in any of the config files to make them findable and are not in release assets. So I'll stop there. Because the community demo just did a full 15 or 16 minutes. But
you can have a few more minutes if you need to. But I was going to ask, bottom line, how many SBOMs have you found so far?
I have definitively found on the order of between 10 and 12 SBOMs, but many of those I kind of knew were there to start with. However, I have not just anecdotal evidence, but like I can share a DuckDB file if somebody wants, which is nice and compact. That would imply that there's far more of them being generated. They just need to be found. And a substantial more. So some of the aggregation tables that I could report on next time I show this when I actually have more data together. But one of the ratios I'm tracking is like, hey, where did you find an SBOM generation tool for which there is not an SBOM found, right? So that kind of forms a to-do list. And
how many projects are you finding SBOM generation tools for?
Again, I don't have all the numbers, but on the order of 50 or 60.
Okay.
There's a whole bunch of container scanning tools. And to some of our conversations before, I suspect that number is even bigger because if someone is like, using SIFT or using Trivia or using those kinds of tools already, they're likely generating SBOMs. And my quick grep through it showed that, yeah, we're into scores of projects who are actually doing that, but
Okay.
I'm not far from being able to answer that question more definitively. Yeah. And then at some point when I get to that point where I can actually report on what is, which I think I'm just some SQL queries away at this point. There's no more monkeying around with GraphQL queries or anything like that. I think with the data we already have, I can just iterate quick on at the SQL level. Lastly, I'll say I didn't want to show it, but there's a project called Ladybug DB, which is a new fork of something called KuzuDB, which is sort of like a labeled property graph, Cypher-based graph engine that's Apache 2 and is like DuckDB is to relational data as this thing is to graph data. So in memory, using Apache Arrow backing store. So once we kind of finish the milestone of this and then actually connect it to some of the work that was already done to run not just Guac, but also a couple other things that will let us query that data and use it without needing a very large Guac instance by persisting those graphs and moving them into a better backing store. This could be one way to do it that I've just discovered in the last couple of days. And I'm mentioning it because some of the analysis we might want to do, like applying community detection or centrality analysis, like what groups of tools are used together a whole lot, or what's being used by the community and how is that sliced and diced without doing it in a relational, very expensive or hard to write the queries for, but using more graph-based queries, much like Guac itself does. But when looking at what software supply chain security tools are being used by the community of CNCF and Linux Foundation projects, for just projects in general, that becomes then a repeatable solution where we can just run the same queries. There's some Jupyter notebooks that are checked in. If anyone actually wants to look at the current data set, I kind of check them in after running them so you can kind of see. And if you clone my working branch or the main branch later on today, you can actually run the notebooks locally. I've baked it all into, so you can do npm run lab, whatever, and it'll launch Jupyter Lab with a notebook. So yeah. Oh, and the last thing is I've built the DuckDB database with a bunch of extensions, some of which I'm using, like full text search and autocomplete for your queries and things. But there's a bunch of other useful extensions, like the JSON extension, which I'm using. For example, all the YAML files I turn into JSON and then use DuckDB's JSON stuff, which is great at manipulating and reshaping JSON to get at the data in those YAML files. I have stubbed out the same thing for markdown files. So for example, the security.md file, we can actually look at that in a structured way. I'm in the middle of building, for example, a table of all of the workflow steps kind of normalized out, so we can, in an analytics way, go, okay, now that we know what projects have workflows that are using that tool, let's make it easy for me or whomever wants to join me to have a really specific, these are the steps that are using it, right? And we catalog all the various GitHub actions that are being used and other tools, not just from their names, but from the actions that are actually run, because now we can look at all of those YAML files using this very efficient, turn it to JSON, and then pull it in with DuckDB native stuff. The coolest feature is vertical stacking, right? So if you have optional elements, it will kind of do what you would expect if you're used to pandas or polars, but do it for SQL just out of the box. So DuckDB is proving to be great. I also build in the UI components. You can run DuckDB-UI and the database file, and you get something that looks like a Jupyter notebook, but provides some additional data exploration stuff that all just is free and runs local and fast. So that's kind of where I am now. Like I said, what I really need is some domain expertise around things that are not in GitHub Actions, as well as maybe some of the SBOM generation tools. And that could be collaborative too. I'll have an Apache license on the project shortly, and then have it set up so others can contribute or mess around with it. PR is welcome and happy to chat anytime too if anyone wants to actually pair or or ping pong, but right now it's just kind of in me almost to a fault by myself, just kind of cranking on it to get to a place where we can make a plan for the rest of the initiative that's data space based. C'est tout. Oh,
It sounds like Jeremy knows where the Kubernetes SBOMs are, so maybe
Sweet.
he'll
I'll
connect
follow
you.
up directly. Yeah, I mean, I've backtracked through to the bomb tool and all of that, but then finding out where it's being used would be great. So maybe I can ping you one-on-one.
Yeah, I think where it's being used is a different topic. Where it's being stored, we can definitely.
Hey, that's even
Definitely.
better. Like, I mean, if there's just a place I can point to, then
Yeah,
you know,
it's
I'll add them to the list.
it's in a
Yeah.
Google Storage thing. I can't remember where it is off the top of my head. I'll find it.
It's not linked from any of the release artifacts.
I know there was a blog I think a while back.
Okay.
So
I'm trying to find that. And
in our supply chain security initiative meetings, which I changed the names around because I just thought it was cool that it's SCSI. Like if anyone played around with IO in the past, SCSI. But Evan has had sort of a wry grin around some of the naivete that I had. Like I'm very positive and have lots of exuberance, but you know, I've been trying to ground that a little bit with, okay, well, can we actually know what the state of the ecosystem is? That by itself is an insight that we don't really have right now. So, the full stack that I've kind of come up with should all work in a browser. So my end goal is to kind of have this tool have a GitHub pages, or have this initiative have a GitHub pages hosted static site that's just like the current state of the ecosystem, you know, as a way to just surface the data so the community can then use it. But I'm specifically not making scorecards or maturity indexes or like, you know, any kind of shamey thing. I just want to say, here's what is. And then, right. So I'm not trying to recreate something like Linux Insights that takes more opinions on it, but just make something to inform our initiative that can be useful more broadly.
Yep.
That will scale to like open source scale, like all of Apache Go.
I mean,
whatever.
Right now, I think it's a useful discovery to say, hey, we know people are putting the work into SBOMs, but nobody can find them.
Or it's like word of mouth and people know.
It's not
it's all
well documented where to find them.
Yes. So like, for example, a tool that we might provide to CNCF projects is like, I see that you're generating SBOMs and we've already ferreted out where they're going because we can look through the build logs and the CI jobs in an automagic way. Here is a like templated, filled out, like with as much info as we could get, security insights v2 file that you could just add. Like we could, I don't know if we want to go so far as to just make a PR to their repos, but like that could be done in an automated way, in a fairly straightforward way, right? Or we could make issues that say, hey, we noticed you're generating SBOMs, but nobody can find them, or something like that. I want to do it the right way and manage communications. So
it also looks like you haven't been looking at the OCI referrers.
Not yet, but that's on the menu.
Which may be another place, given that a lot of projects are publishing OCI images.
Yes, and we had talked about Docker files, so I have subbed out a place in that thing that's not working right now.
Yeah.
In my local thing, I'm just in SQL hell, and I'm missing a freaking somewhere.
Yeah.
But I can just the same way pull all Docker files from these repos and then process them. Right, so like we can actually do quite a lot. Without resorting to like clone the world and then do it all locally like I've done in the past. But just GraphQL, I haven't hit my limit yet, even pulling, you know, what I'm up to like 700 or 800 repos or something.
Yeah, I think that's triggered a question in my head. Like how prevalent is the use of OCI referrers for storing stuff like that? I know internally, like we use it a lot in Microsoft.
So
and I think like a follow-up question, do you think that there will be a lot of, like, as people like look at CRA, maybe not for open source projects, but do you think people will maybe look at Vex as a thing they have to do and have to publish somewhere? Is OCI refer something that people can take a look at for that as well?
So I'll say I'll take them in sort of LIFO order.
Yeah.
I'm not qualified to answer your last question and a half. There are others on the call that probably have a much more informed opinion. I've been kind of nerding out about dependency hell coming from a Windows background and Linux, and I've worked on build tools and stuff, and so I've always been a nerd for dependencies. And so this whole SBOM question, as it pertains to cloud native systems, it's all of the same ilk that's always fascinated me, but I came to this with not a lot of direct experience with SBOM tools other than playing with Guac when I was at my previous employer at some degree of scale to pull in a whole bunch of SBOMs. But it was the same kind of thing. Here's a bucket, there they are, right? And so kind of going backwards to get to the middle question you asked, I think that the approach that we've experimented with, and I've got some spot docs and specs I can point you at. I built a GitHub org just to have a place to play with it and license it the right way under, so that we could write about it and hash out some designs. But I think I have a scalable, composable design to house the data and the tooling, which is presently running, Guac, but also dgraph. I currently have a whole design that uses an RDF store, but now that I've discovered this actual Cypher licensed the right way embeddable graph database for the kind of data sizes we're talking about here, I think it would make sense to use that. And that lets me dramatically simplify the other design where we're persisting things as RDF and NQuads and having to do a whole bunch of gymnastics. But my point is, when I think we have like all of these graphs that are generated from SBOMs and other attestations and things assembled, we can answer those kinds of questions on the CRA stuff. And the two questions, namely, are, will we get a heterogeneous temporal graph out of this, right? We can. The first is what happens when licenses change in transitive dependencies. And like algorithmically and from a data structures perspective, I think once we find all the SBOMs and pull them into the tooling we proposed, yes, we can actually absolutely deal with that first question related to the CRA, which is like, am I license compliant? And that's something that the CNCF needs as well, and is one of the two foundational questions that this thing aims to answer. And the second is what happens when new vulnerabilities are advertised for things that CNCF projects pull in as transitive dependencies, and how do we analyze that and provide assistance on like how do we even know what projects are using the affected versions? I think we can do one better because a lot of observability data now that a couple of years ago in tag observability we started the effort. Now it's an OTel. We have profiling as like an open telemetry type. So I think much like the Green Reviews project and Tag Operational Resilience is saying, hey, CNCF projects, here's the thing that can help you quantify how much energy you're using under what scenarios and put some data to it to help with adoption. I think we can do the same thing with, hey, CNCF projects, do you have reference architectures, or is there a way to generate some observability data like profiling, so we can not only say, hey, you've got the affected module that a CVE just came out in these workloads, right? Again, the problem statement is I'm a practitioner and I've got thousands to millions to tens of millions of containers running at any point in time globally. Like, what do I care about the most, right? You need this algorithmic approach to figuring that out. That second question, new CVE, what's impacted? But we can then take it one step further and say, is the part of the module that is expressing the CVE
that's the purpose of Vex, yes.
Right, but I mean, like, we could do that with Vex, but I'm saying that like I see like a convergence in possibility in terms of tooling, right? Because if we have this more detailed transitive dependency graph map of all the things, and we have a supergraph modular subgraph graph federation architecture for how we access all of this, and everything I've been talking about with all of this SBOM and the graphs built from it, that's just one subgraph, right? Another subgraph is like observability data. Another subgraph can be Kubernetes servers, live ones, because we have OpenAI to GraphQL. So we have like a federated architecture to actually have queries that are federated across these. Now we can get to that like holy grail of like, okay, was it, the example I always use, like MSXML and some WebSocket optional feature that no one ever uses. And there was a CVE, and suddenly MSXML, this is Windows, not Linux, but like everyone freaked out. This was a long time ago. But it was then you had to do like a case by case, workload by workload walk to say, are the code paths that are part of the CVE even running in my data centers? So I think like well outside the scope of this initiative, but like this is laying some of the groundwork to provide like a substrate where we can then federate with other stuff and say, okay, now we can answer these more interesting questions that blend structured observability data, which is kind of graphy in its shape, with all of the rest.
I am going to have to pull this
Yeah.
to a close.
Yep, I'm done. I promise. Jeremy asked a series of questions. I think I got in reverse order all three, but if I didn't, let me know. But that's my thoughts. Oh, and lastly, the project does export CSVs and stuff like that. All of the tables are automatically turned into Parquet. So if you want to play with them in some other tool, every entity table and aggregation table has its own Parquet file when you run it. So I can even put those up on Kaggle or somewhere else, or we could make it a job that runs out of the CNCF that updates it weekly. That would be fairly straightforward if people just want the data.
I think let's get the answers to those first couple milestone questions first. But given that we've got 20-ish minutes left, I'm going to try to blaze through some of the rest of this stuff. There were no other Tag SC meetings last week because APAC is on every other schedule. Brant was at the TOC meeting. He's not here today, but he mentioned the security assessments blog maybe should go to the CNCF blog. So I think Eddie is chasing that, but Eddie's not here either. If anyone thinks that needs more ownership, it's a good time to speak up. And Jeremy, if we've missed anything else,
Yeah, I think the context around that was there was an issue in the TOC repo from like last year, I think, surfacing value of performing self and joint assessments better. It's 1378. I'll put it into the chat.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, and what we had discussed was just in general surfacing that, but also maybe integrating it more into the graduation processes so that it's explicitly called out as suggested item. Because right now there's a note in the security section that says that this can be augmented by a joint security assessment. So what we discussed was two things. One, just having a blog in general to reiterate the benefits and raise it so people are kind of aware. And then I think Facila talked to Brant, and we found out that you all had a blog in the works that was in the tech security repo before. Never went live. Seems like a good idea to maybe put that into the CNCF log. And then secondarily, there's a PR open in the TOC repo right now. It needs a couple more links added to it. It's 1929. We're essentially just adding perform a joint assessment as a suggested item for incubation and for graduation. Still not required, but just a little bit more specificity so people see it and see it as more of a suggestion rather than just like, here's a note that says you could do this, but it's kind of vague and not specific. So we thought it would be good to add that as a extra thing. So if anybody has comments on that as a suggestion, feel free to leave comments on 1929.
Okay, thank you. Project updates. The supply chain insights we have covered at length. Justin, anything from security assessments you'd like to cover?
Kyverno's about to kick off. Basically, we're, I think, waiting for Andrew Martin to do the to actually do the naive questions phase is I think where we're at. But now's the time where if someone else had wanted to jump in and participate, it's still early enough because the people participating in the assessment, other than the lead, haven't actually done anything at this juncture, basically. So yeah, we already have a pretty reasonable crew, but that doesn't mean that, other people couldn't also jump in.
Jen, I'm going to put you on the spot for the compliance and automated governance.
Yeah, that works. And I'm glad Jeremy is here because I had a few questions. I don't know that they're specifically need to be answered by the TOC, but we're going through the triaging process for our first initiative kind of under this section. So I left 3 questions there, and they don't need to be answered right now, but I just kind of wanted to make you aware of them. Maybe like you could provide some guidance on the issue if you could. Let me grab it. And just a little bit of context on this specific issue. Right now, we have a security controls catalog, and it's captured in a spreadsheet, which makes it a little bit difficult to have the community contribute to the spreadsheet. So we're looking to put it into version control. So kind of the questions were, should it go in the CNCF TOC repo? Who would approve it moving there? What type of like readiness does it need to achieve before it gets moved to the CNCF TOC repo? So that's the main update I have there.
We'll take a look at that after this. Thanks for mentioning it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Just a moment. Let me pull up the current issues for triage and share this window. No one wants to see all my windows. Let's see. Supply chain security maturity model. We said we were going to we said we were going to do a last call in a month or so if the person who proposed this hadn't responded. So I'm going to put in a last call comment. Confidential containers incubation application. Looks like this had recent progress. Identity and access management initiative. I know Yoshiyuki is chatting with Karina about that. We talked about Kyverno. The white paper has recent activity, and then this is the 1910. So triage looks like we are up to date. Stand up and check-ins from partner groups. Does anyone know of interesting stuff going on in related CNCF or OpenSSF groups that we should be looking at or paying attention to?
I'll say this is kind of a little more loosely related, but there's a little bit, there's starting to be a bit of a push to try to drag more academics a little closer to practice.
Okay.
Mostly this is like me and a few other people trying to like make less like ivory tower, pie in the sky stuff happen in academia that relates to stuff that we're working on. And so if there's people that are interested in participating in some way to try to help academics understand if they're working on real problems or talk to researchers that are going to go run off and do a bunch of work on some area, then I'd be happy to talk more with you. There will probably be some more formal way that this gets like announced or something later. But I just wanted to plant some early seeds amongst people so that when you hear about something like this later, you have some idea that this might be coming. You can also give people a chance to ask questions and stuff if they have that now.
There was also a call out at some in the APAC meeting that there's a OWASP effort to classify the top 10 security risks from Kubernetes. And if that's of interest to people, I dropped the link in there. And we have...
Quick question. It's like
Yes.
a one-liner. When you say classify, do you mean like in loose terms or in like ontological terms? Like what do you mean by classify? Against an existing rubric?
It's
Are
a
you making
form
one?
that asks you to rate a bunch of different risks from most important to least important. They've done some.
Oh, I see.
classification already.
So
I
yeah,
see.
so
I
basically,
didn't know
like,
if it was like an abstract classification effort or not.
No.
so like academics would do this in a more rigorous way, but academics will do like nonsensical things in a rigorous way too, because they don't understand the actual things that are going to matter. And so I think that if we can, part of what I've been trying to like talk about here and push is like closer communication, where I literally, even for things related to like in toto or tough or other things, will occasionally read a paper and the people never talked to us or asked us a question. And they made a bunch of like wild assumptions about how stuff that we built works. And it's like, we have community meetings. Like you can come and email us, you can ask us things. You don't have to like guess. Like, and so getting more of that into the academic community while giving people that actually know how to do these types of like rigorous studies and stuff to answer really pressing problems, I think benefits everybody. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I'm really happy to hear it. That's awesome. I've been
We'll see.
cataloging all the different rubrics and things, and I was like, "Oh, we've got another one." So
Yeah,
cool.
we'll
Maybe it's
see. I
fair.
mean, it's like
But no,
getting
this
two
sounds much
communities
more
of,
pragmatic and
yeah, it's getting
real.
two communities of cats to play well together, which is always hard.
It looks like we are fairly set for the next, I want to say, 4 weeks or so of community demos. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the OpenSSF security baseline. Then there's going to be a Get Tough demo. Then there's going to be KubeCon. So after that, we'll need another presentation. And that means that it is 10:49, unless anyone has any other business. I'm going to call it. Thank you all.
Thanks, Evan.